Were you ever tired of D&D 5e's enormous amount of rules? For example, combat is very intricate and can take very long, or that the character creation is very complex, or maybe the opposite, that your old school D&D sessions don't have that you want to have more combat options and more character options. Well, today I'm going to talk about the differences of old school D&D and modern D&D, so let's get going. And before we start, I have to define a term here. I'm going to use the term OSR quite a lot. And OSR means Old School Renaissance, Old School Revival, Old School Rules. Pick one. There are multiple terms for that. I usually use Old School Renaissance. OSR is not a system. It's a community that goes back to the early 2000s, and it's people that started to reappreciate or wanted to revisit the old school D&D versions because of their simplicity. They are a lot faster, especially when it comes to combat, and they are also more focused on a sandbox-style approach where emergent storytelling is more prevalent than a pre-scripted narrative. Also, they were kind of unsatisfied with the direction D&D was going in because it became more complex and complex, starting with version 3.5, where they introduced skills based on abilities. And it also was accelerated by the publication of the OGL, the Open Gaming License, by WOTC, which allowed people to use WOTC created or like material that was created by WOTC to use that in their own publications without having to pay any kind of fees. And today you have a gigantic amount of game systems that follow the OSR spirit, a more rules-light approach, more sandbox-oriented play focused on player agency and emergent storytelling. And you may ask yourself now why I make this video now when the scene is already so old, like over 20 years. Well, a player of mine asked me what the differences between old school and modern D&D are. And while explaining, I thought it's a good idea for a video as well, because it's a very foundational topic. And the recent criticism of WOTC and the D&D 2024 versions, which I'm not going to get into now, I'm going to talk about old school versus like modern D&D, has re-sparked the discussion about the OSR and also their presence on social media. And finally, this video also serves as a good preparation for my actual play episodes I want to make, because I'm going to use one of these OSR systems as the game system for the actual play campaign. So what is this video going to be? It's not going to be a one side is good, one side is bad video. I'm going to show you the differences between old school Renaissance games and modern D&D, so you have an idea about where they differ and how they feel to play, and maybe also what kind of D&D or RPG games are best played with them. And just a quick copyright notice before we start. I'm not the author of any of the systems I'm going to show, and it's not my intellectual property, and I'm also not affiliated with any of the authors. I'm not sponsored by them, and I'm going to put copyright notices, copyright info in the video description below. And just for the people who don't know, I'm going to lose a couple of words about modern D&D. The current version is the D&D 2024 edition, which is very close to D&D 5e. There are differences in the character creation options and a few game mechanics and spells, but I think largely it's the same. D&D 5e was the longest running version of D&D with about 10 years and was very, very successful. There is an enormous amount of supplements, either third-party or official supplements by WOTC. Talking about the OSR systems is a bit of a longer task, because there are a lot of systems out there that are played in the OSR community and that follow the old school D&D spirit. I've only played BX, which is the 0.5 edition of D&D from the late 70s, I think, early 80s. And OSE, which is Old School Essentials, and that one is a very, very close retro clone of BX, so they are very similar. In most of the OSR systems, they are inheriting their mechanics from BX D&D, so 0.5 edition, and they are also taking inspiration by AD&D first edition, which is then the early 80s, I think. Since I only have played these two systems, I asked the internet which are some systems that are very close to OD&D and some that are a bit further away but still belong to the OSR community. And very close are OSE, as I said already, Osric, Shadowdark, and Swords and Wizardry, and some that are a bit further away but still within the OSR spirit is Merkborg, Dungeon Crawl Classics DCC, Knave, and the Black Hack 2nd edition. I have played none of them except OSE, so I can't really say anything about the systems, but those are the ones that, following Reddit and also some other web pages, are the most popular within the OSR, or some of the most popular in the OSR community. And we are going to look at BX and OSE, Old School Essentials, today. BX is, as I said already, like the major inspiration for the OSR scene, and OSE is a wonderfully compiled retro clone of BX, which is very, very close to the original. And also, their rules-light approach is really nice for me because I like to have wiggle room as a GM and not have every kind of scenario defined by a rule which I should adhere to. You just use the rules you have. For example, there is no rule for every character class that they can stealth and how well they stealth, so you just use another rule which says that most of the creatures have a 1 in 6 chance to hear noises in a dungeon. So you just have the creature roll if it heard something. And with that being said, we are going to start with the differences between OSR and modern D&D. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I don't want to bore you and I want to keep the video at a reasonable length. So I just chose a couple of categories or points where I'm going to talk about, and for some of them I have a couple of examples which I use to underlie what I'm saying. First up would be playstyle. In OSR, it's more strategic. You want to stay away from combat most of the time. Going into a dungeon and then encountering 10 goblins in there and just running in there is not a good idea. That will most certainly lead to the death of at least 1 or 2 characters in the party. And it's more focused on exploration, either dungeon and wilderness. D&D 5e is more tactical. Combat is very intricate. You have loads of rules for every character. All classes have like different combat abilities, and it's more focused on narrative and combat, which brings us to the next point, combat. In BX or OSE, or OSR in general, combat is very deadly. There are no balanced encounters, there's no challenge rating. 10 orcs are 10 orcs, and they will be very deadly at 1st level, and they will still be a threat at 3rd or 4th level. Combat in D&D in like old school D&D can involve 6-7 adventurers against 30 goblins, easily 30 goblins, 35 goblins. So it's going to be very tough and very deadly most of the time. And it's also faster due to less rules and group-based initiative being the standard initiative mode in most old school D&D games, OSR games. In 5e, combat is very intricate. You have lots of mechanics. Every class has different skills. They can do different things in combat. The Dungeon Master's guide said that you should present balanced encounters appropriate for the level, and they should be steadily increasing in challenge. And combat in D&D 5e is often slow due to these intricate rules and also these intricate character builds. And as an example for how deadly combat can be in an OSR game, I'm going to show you a death scene or a capturing scene from one of my solo D&D campaigns. And the group were like 11 people. They went into the dungeon, and all was fine for the first 3-4 hours. They encountered a couple of goblins, a couple of hobgoblins. One of the group was like severely wounded but survived. And at some point, they got surprised by 6 goblins. And 3 people died from the group, and the other 8 were taken captive. And that's how fast it goes. You are fine, and then you get surprised by a group of goblins or by a group of orcs or whatever, and they just kill you. Let's talk about the characters. In most OSR games, they are normal people who over time become competent adventurers. And the story is more focused on like their emergent storytelling, where the players, through their characters' actions, define the story. In D&D 5e, It's these larger than life characters in a grand adventure, and towards mid and high level, they are pretty much superheroes which can't be defeated anymore. Like if you want to kill a party in 5e at 8th or 9th level as a GM, you really have to put them up against something incredibly strong, or they will have no problem in killing. It's incredible how strong they are in 5e. Let's talk about difficulty. If you, and you never should, want your party to die, it's going to be a lot easier in OSR style games like BX and OSE than in D&D 5e. In OSR style games, character death is always a threat, and it's real, as you saw before. There are also a lot fewer regeneration and healing and like resting opportunities. For example, in OSE, if you want your character to regain health, the character has to rest the entire day, and at the end of the day, you roll a d3, and that's the amount of HP you regain. In 5e, characters quickly become very strong, and they are almost unkillable. As I said, you shouldn't try to kill your party, but sometimes, you think, oh, this encounter could go wrong, but honestly, I have rarely seen it actually go wrong. They always find a way to use their abilities to kill their enemies, and in OSR games, that's a lot harder. Let's talk about rules in general as well. As I already said before, most OSR games follow the old school D&D rules light approach, where you don't have that many rules, but instead more rulings by the GM. It's more focused on roleplay, problem solving, and player agency. In D&D 5e, you have a large set of rules with many specific rules for certain situations and scenarios. You have a very complex character creation, which then leads to, again, more rules during combat and also during exploration, because they all have these intricate skills and stuff that they can use. And the game is really more focused on character skills and abilities, while you don't have these for most classes in the OSR games. For example, in BX and OSE, you have the Thief, who has a couple of skills, Barbarian has a couple of skills. There are certain classes which have skills, but generally you don't have any kind of skills like investigation, perception, animal handling. It's all depending on the players and the GM, how they want to solve certain situations and what is needed for that. And of course, we also have to talk about magic, right? Magic is important to us. In most OSR games, magic is available, but less frequently so than in modern D&D. For example, in BX and OSE, a magic user memorizes a spell in the morning. It takes a bit of time, and then they can use that spell once a day. And then they forget it. It's gone from their mind, and they have to rememorize it. In D&D, magic is everywhere, especially from mid-level. Spells can be cast as long as the player has the necessary spell slots available. So magic is very abundant in like modern D&D and can be cast or used a lot. So what's the main takeaway from this? Well, you have two sides which have the same heritage, the old D&D versions, but have developed into two very different styles of play. While you have a more simple approach on the OSR side, simpler combat, less rules, more rulings, focused on exploration and sandbox play and emergent storytelling and player agency, you have on the like modern D&D side, you have a focus on like predefined narratives and story arcs. Combat is a huge focus. You have a way more intricate game system with a lot more rules. So yes, they are very different, but they have the same origins. My recommendation for an OSR product would be OSE, Old School Essentials. It's very close to BX, probably like 90%. So you can take monsters from BX and also from AD&D and use them in the games. And that's one thing as well. In OSR, all these systems are very compatible because they are all based on the same system, and that is BX. So if you want to try this out, try OSE, Old School Essentials. The organization in the books is very nice. It's very nicely put together. Not too expensive. You can get that on like DriveThruRPG. I'm going to put that in the video description as well. And with this, we have arrived at the end of the episode. I hope this video was informative for you and you enjoyed it. If you did so, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you are in a position where you are thinking about either trying an OSR game or modern D&D, if you're coming from OSR or like old school D&D, then you should have enough information to make a decision about that now. I thank you again for watching this video and sticking with me until the end of it. And I'd say see you next time at the Infinite Text. Bye bye.